You are going
Seeing
to
his
pay for
ring,
this
the
right
waitress
now, or
whispered,
I am
"My
calling
father had
security.
one
I
like
am
that."
not
The
paying for a
mafia
single
boss went
thing.
pale.
You are terrible
The
at your
smell
job.
of wet asphalt mixed with the faint scent of coffee and fried bread from late-night diners. In the shadows, figures moved silently, slipping from one dark alley to another. Among them was a man whose presence made even the most fearless pause for a moment. He walked alone, his coat heavy with water, the collar turned up against the cold. His boots clicked against the stones, steady and deliberate, each step measured. A dark aura surrounded him, one that whispered danger without words. Those who knew his name rarely spoke it aloud. He was a man of power and fear, a mafia boss, a ruler of unseen streets, a man who had survived betrayals and bullets alike. Tonight, however, he was not here for business. He was here for silence, for shadows, for a place where no one would notice him. He pushed open the door of a small diner at the corner of the street. The bell above the door jingled softly, announcing his arrival. Inside, the diner was warm, filled with the comforting smells of food and coffee. The chatter was soft and the lights were dim, creating a safe cocoon against the storm outside. A young woman stood behind the counter, her hair tied back loosely, strands falling into her face as she wiped down the table. She moved with careful efficiency, her eyes bright but guarded. Life had taught her to observe before she acted, to notice the smallest details because sometimes they meant the difference between safety and danger. When she looked up, her eyes fell on him. She noticed the way he carried himself, the calm control in his posture, the tension coiled beneath the surface. And then she noticed the ring, a heavy silver ring on his finger, engraved with a symbol that seemed strangely familiar. Her breath caught. She whispered almost to herself, "My father had one like that." The man froze mid-step, his dark eyes locking onto hers. There was a flicker in his expression, a hint of unease. He had expected many things tonight, an ambush, a lie, a betrayal, but recognition from a stranger was not one of them. The ring, it was older than most could imagine, older than his own memories of it. It was a mark, a link to a past he had tried desperately to leave behind. He walked toward the counter, his movements smooth, deliberate. "Do you mind if I sit?" he asked, his voice low, almost soft, yet carrying authority. She shook her head slightly, still staring at the ring, unable to hide her curiosity. As he sat, she returned to her work, but her mind could not stop racing. That ring belonged to someone from the stories her father had told in hushed tones when she was a child. Her father had been a man of courage and pride, but his choices had brought danger to their family. She did not understand everything, but she remembered the fear in his eyes during his last days, the way he had whispered secrets she had not been old enough to comprehend. The boss watched her for a moment, noting her careful movements, the way her eyes lingered on him. There was something in her gaze, fear, yes, but also strength. That mixture intrigued him. Most people either flinched or stared in awe at his presence. She did neither. She simply watched, quietly, thoughtfully. "Coffee?" he asked, breaking the silence. She nodded, pouring a cup and sliding it toward him. The warmth of the mug contrasted with the chill of the storm outside. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sounds the soft hum of the diner and the tapping of rain against the windows. "You seem familiar," she said finally, her voice gentle but curious. "I don't mean to be rude, it's just—" Her words trailed off as she gestured toward the ring. He looked down at it, then back at her. The memories it carried pressed against his mind. Faces long gone, promises broken, and a past soaked in blood and regret. "That ring," he said quietly. "It belonged to someone you know," she swallowed, nodding. "My father, he had one just like it. I never understood why he wore it all the time. I thought it was just jewelry, but now—" Her voice faltered. The boss's fingers tightened slightly around the mug. He had known her father once, though he had hoped this day would never come. He had buried that past deep beneath layers of power and control, but the ring was a reminder he could never escape. "You should be careful," he said, his tone soft but firm. There are things about that ring, about your father's past, that are dangerous. She looked at him, a mixture of fear and fascination in her eyes. Dangerous how? He hesitated. Every word he spoke could draw attention, could unravel secrets better left hidden. Some things, he said finally, are better left in the shadows. Outside, the storm grew stronger and the wind rattled the windows. The bell above the door jingled again, but this time it was not the wind, it was someone entering. A tall figure, moving silently, watching the diner from the doorway. The boss's eyes narrowed. He recognized the stance, the tension. Danger was close, very close. He shifted slightly, his body coiled like a spring ready to strike. "Stay here," he said quietly to the waitress. "Don't move." She froze, but she did not run. She could sense the danger, and yet she could not leave him, not because of curiosity alone, but because something in her heart told her that she needed to stay, to see the truth behind the ring and the man who wore it. The figure in the doorway moved closer, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. The lights flickered, the rain beat harder against the glass, and time seemed to stretch. The boss stood, his presence suddenly commanding the room. Even the few late-night patrons in the diner felt the shift, a ripple of unease passing through them. The stranger stopped at the door, eyes hidden beneath the brim of a hat. The boss's hand brushed against the ring, a silent acknowledgement of its significance. The ring was not just jewelry, it was a key, a warning, a bond between past and present. "You should not be here," the boss said, his voice calm but edged with steel. The figure tilted its head, silent for a long moment, then slowly moved away, vanishing into the night. The tension in the diner slowly eased, but the feeling of impending danger remained, lingering like a shadow that would not leave. The waitress watched him carefully. "Who was that?" she asked softly. "Someone who should not exist in your world," he replied, his gaze distant. "Someone tied to your father's past and to this ring." She felt a chill run down her spine. Her father's stories, the warnings he had whispered, suddenly made sense. The world she had thought was ordinary was far more dangerous than she had imagined. And now she was entangled in it. The boss returned to his seat, placing his hands on the table, fingers brushing the ring. He looked at her, really looked, as if trying to gauge whether she could handle the truth that was coming. "You should know," he said slowly, "your father's choices, they left marks. Not all of them can be erased. Some will find you even years later." Her heart pounded. "Why me?" she asked, almost a whisper. "I'm just me." He smiled faintly, a shadow of sadness crossing his face. "Because you carry the past with you. That ring, it binds you to it. And now, whether you like it or not, to me as well." The diner grew quiet again. Rain drummed against the windows, the wind howled through the alleyways, and the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. The waitress could not take her eyes off the ring, nor from the man who wore it. She felt a pull she did not understand, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something deeper, something dangerous and exciting all at once. The boss sipped his coffee, his mind racing. He had thought he had left the past behind, but fate had other plans. This girl, this waitress, she was a thread in the tapestry of secrets he had long tried to bury. And now, that thread was unraveling, slowly but surely, threatening to expose truths that could destroy everything he had built. He finally stood, his chair scraping softly against the floor. "You should close early tonight," he said, his tone softening. "For your safety." She nodded, unsure why she trusted him, unsure why she followed his quiet instruction. She could feel the weight of something inevitable pressing down upon her. As he walked to the door, he paused, glancing back at her. "Remember this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a command. "Not everything that seems ordinary is safe. And not every shadow is empty." The bell rang as he left, merging with the storm outside. She watched him disappear into the night, the shape of his coat and the glint of the ring still etched in her mind. The diner felt colder now, emptier, as if the storm had carried away the safety it had promised. She returned to her tasks, but her thoughts kept drifting to him and to the ring. She did not yet understand the full story, but a part of her knew that her life had changed forever. And somewhere in the darkness of the city, the Mafia boss paused under a flickering streetlight, staring at his own reflection in a puddle. He went pale as he realized that the past he had tried to bury had come walking toward him, unafraid, carrying the echo of a father's secrets and the promise of danger yet to come. The rain continued to fall, relentless and cold. And somewhere in the storm, a shadow waited, watching, patient and unyielding. Cliffhanger. The boss's eyes sharpened and he whispered under his breath, "It begins." The night outside had thickened, the rain now a constant curtain falling over the streets. The city seemed alive, whispering secrets in every shadow, as if it knew the truths the Mafia boss had tried to bury for years. He moved through the alleyways with caution, the familiar rhythm of the streets guiding him, yet the memory of the waitress's words haunted him. My father had one like that, the ring. He could not forget it, not only because it carried the weight of old promises and dangerous alliances, but because it connected her to a man from his past, a man who had shaped part of the empire he now ruled. That man, her father, had been clever, brave, and reckless all at once. And now, through the girl, the past had returned to demand reckoning. He reached his mansion, the heavy gates swinging open to welcome him into shadows and silence. The house was grand, yet cold, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the fears and regrets of everyone who had walked its halls. Portraits of ancestors stared down with quiet judgment, and every corner held a secret. He walked into his private study, locking the doors behind him. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, to let the storm outside wash over him without the need for constant vigilance. The waitress, meanwhile, returned to her modest apartment above the diner. Her hands trembled slightly as she set down her wet coat, her mind racing with questions she was too afraid to ask. The ring, so familiar and yet impossible, burned in her memory. Her father had died years ago, leaving fragments of stories, half-answered questions, and that ring. She had never understood its true meaning, but now, seeing it on the Mafia boss's hand, everything felt connected: her father, her family, and the dark world he had been part of. The next morning the city awoke under a gray sky, the rain leaving behind slick streets and the faint smell of wet earth. The boss had not slept. He could not. Every corner of his mind was occupied with the waitress, with her father, and the knot of secrets tied to that silver ring. He knew that if he did not act carefully, both of them could be caught in a web of danger far greater than either understood. He returned to the diner under the pretense of a customer, blending in with the morning crowd. The waitress recognized him immediately, her heart quickening, but she did not speak. She kept her movements calm, serving coffee and breakfast as if the night's encounter had been nothing more than a dream. "You don't need to hide from me," he said softly as he took his seat at the counter. His eyes held hers with a quiet intensity. "I came here because I wanted to see you and because there are things you need to know." She paused, carefully pouring a cup of coffee. "I don't understand," she said. "Why me? Why did my father's ring? Why is it on your hand?" He sighed, leaning back slightly. The words were heavy, but they had to be said. "Your father was a part of a world few people understand. He made choices that affected many, including me. That ring, it marks a bond that was meant to protect, but it also carries danger. And now because of it, you are in that danger too." Her eyes widened. "Danger? My father, he was careful. I never thought—" She stopped herself, realizing the truth in his voice. "Yes," he said quietly, "careful but not enough. And now that past is reaching out for both of us." For a moment neither spoke. The diner was filled with the low hum of conversation, but around them a silence settled, a bubble that separated them from the world. She felt drawn to him, though she did not understand why. There was something beneath his hard exterior, something vulnerable, almost human, and yet the power he carried was undeniable. "You need to trust me," he said finally, his tone firm but gentle. "If you do not, you will not survive what is coming. The people tied to your father, they are not gone, and some are willing to do anything to reclaim what they believe is theirs." She nodded slowly, her fear mingling with curiosity. "Then tell me everything you know." And so he did. Not all at once, but in fragments, careful pieces of a story that stretched back years. Her father had been part of a secret feud, a war fought not with armies but with shadows and whispers. Alliances had been formed and broken, promises made in blood and sealed with rings. The ring she had seen was a symbol, a warning, and a connection that could not be broken easily. As he spoke, she listened, absorbing every word. Each revelation added layers to the image she had of her father and the world he had been a part of. And through it all, she realized how deeply the Mafia boss was connected to it, not just as a leader, but as a man bound by duty, honor, and regret. The bond between them grew in those hours, silent and unspoken. She began to see glimpses of the man behind the fearsome reputation, the weight of decisions, the loneliness of power, and the flicker of humanity he tried to hide. And he, in turn, saw her courage, her intelligence, and her quiet strength. She was no ordinary girl. She was a force, a spark in a world built on shadows. Suddenly, a sharp knock on the diner door shattered the fragile calm. Both of them tensed. The boss rose immediately, his instincts razor-sharp. Outside, a figure lingered in the doorway, partially hidden by the morning fog. A messenger, perhaps, or a spy, someone who had come to remind him that the past never truly stayed buried. He stepped toward the door, his movements controlled, eyes never leaving the stranger. The waitress followed him instinctively, her heart pounding. She did not understand why, but she felt an unspoken connection to the man who carried her father's history, and now her own fate. The figure spoke, a voice calm but edged with authority. "He knows," it said simply. The words carried a weight that made the boss pause, and for the first time a shadow of fear crossed his face. "Your secret, the ring, it has drawn attention. Be careful. Not all who walk in shadows are gone." The messenger vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only a lingering sense of unease. The boss closed the door, locking it behind him. "That was a warning," he said quietly. "A reminder. We are not safe here. The past is closer than ever, and it will not wait." The waitress's hands shook slightly, but she tried to mask it. "What do we do?" she asked. He looked at her, a mixture of resolve and concern in his eyes. "We prepare. We learn what we can and we stay aware. You have a part to play whether you like it or not. And I will protect you even if it costs everything." Her breath caught at his words. Protect her. The idea was strange, unfamiliar. She had always protected herself, always relied on her own strength. Yet in that moment she felt something shift, a trust, tentative and fragile, forming in the midst of danger. As the day wore on, they worked together in careful secrecy. He showed her places she had never seen, hidden rooms and passages in the city, each with its own story, each connected to the history of power and blood her father had been part of. The city itself seemed alive, a labyrinth of danger and secrets, and she began to understand that survival required knowledge, courage, and cunning. They spoke of her father often, piecing together fragments of his life, his choices, and the people he had crossed. She learned of the debts owed, the promises made, and the dangers left behind. And through it all, she felt the weight of the ring, its silver surface gleaming in the light, a reminder of the past she could not escape, and a bond to the man who had once been her father's ally and now her protector. Even as they grew closer, the tension between them remained sharp. He was a man of power, accustomed to control, and she was a woman who had lived with caution and independence. Their interactions were a dance, sometimes cautious, sometimes charged, always with the unspoken knowledge that danger lurked just beyond the light. As night fell again, the city bathed in the glow of streetlights and neon signs. They returned to the diner. The storm had passed, leaving behind a quiet calm, but neither felt safe. The ring on his hand glinted in the dim light, a reminder of the bond, the danger, and the secrets yet to be revealed. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the alley behind the diner. Both turned, instincts sharp. The boss's hand brushed the ring, a silent acknowledgement of the power it carried. The waitress felt a chill, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. A shadow moved at the edge of the alley, and then a voice, low and deliberate, called out, "We have been watching. The past has a price, and it is coming due." The boss's eyes narrowed, and he whispered, "It begins." The waitress's heart raced, fear mingling with a strange thrill. She had stepped into a world far larger and darker than she had imagined. And now she realized her life, and perhaps her heart, was bound to the man who carried her father's ring, and to the legacy it represented. The night stretched on, filled with tension, anticipation, and the quiet promise of revelations yet to come. Outside, the city slept under a fragile calm, unaware of the storm that had already begun in the lives of two people tied together by secrets, danger, and a bond stronger than fear. And somewhere in the shadows, figures moved, watching, waiting, patient and unyielding. Cliffhanger. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick with water, reflecting the muted glow of street lamps and neon signs. The Mafia boss moved silently through the alleys, his coat buttoned tightly, eyes scanning every shadow. Danger had become a constant companion, but today it felt heavier, closer, sharper. The waitress was already at the diner, arranging tables and preparing for the morning crowd. Her hands worked quickly, almost mechanically, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She kept thinking about his words, the warnings, the past she had only begun to understand. Every time she glanced toward the door, she half expected him to appear, the silver ring on his finger glinting in the light. He arrived just as the bell above the door rang, bringing a momentary hush to the few early patrons. His presence was commanding yet quiet, like a shadow moving across the room. The waitress felt a shiver run down her spine. She was not afraid of him, not entirely, but she was aware of the power he carried, the danger that clung to him like a second skin. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, smooth, and careful. He pulled a chair out for her without waiting for a reply. "We need to see what your father left behind. There are answers in places most people would never dare look." She nodded, her heart pounding. "I'm ready," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. She was not sure if she was ready for the danger that would follow, but something inside told her she could not turn back. They left the diner together, moving through hidden alleys and narrow streets that only someone who knew the city well could navigate. The boss led the way, his steps precise, silent, and purposeful. She followed closely, feeling both fear and curiosity. She had never imagined that her father's past was tied so closely to someone so powerful, someone so dangerous, yet somehow protective. They arrived at an old warehouse on the edge of the city, a building abandoned for years. Its windows were broken, and the doors hung crookedly on their hinges. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and the smell of decay. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the walls, casting long, uneven shadows. "This place," she began, but he interrupted, his eyes scanning the shadows. "Yes, it is empty now, but it was once a hub for your father's work. There are things hidden here, documents, symbols, messages left behind, and perhaps someone waiting." Her curiosity grew, mingling with anxiety. She had seen her father's world in fragments, pieces that made sense only now. She realized that every choice he had made, every secret he had kept, had shaped not only her life but the dangerous world she had unknowingly stepped into. They moved deeper into the warehouse, careful with each step. Rusty beams groaned above them, and the floor was littered with broken crates and old machinery. The boss paused near a stack of wooden boxes and knelt, brushing away dust and debris to reveal a small chest. It was old, carved with intricate designs that spoke of secrecy and importance. "This belonged to your father," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with respect. "He left messages, warnings, and perhaps guidance. If we are careful, we can uncover what he wanted you to know." The waitress knelt beside him, lifting the chest's lid. Inside were papers, maps, and old letters, each one tied with a thin ribbon. Her hands shook as she opened the first letter, recognizing her father's handwriting. It was a warning, filled with caution and care, telling her to stay vigilant, to be brave, and to trust only those who had proven loyalty in blood and action. As she read, the boss watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw her fear, her determination, and her growing understanding of the world she had been thrust into. She was no longer the quiet girl behind the diner counter. She was a participant in a story that stretched beyond her imagination, connected to a past that demanded courage, wisdom, and careful choices. Suddenly, the sound of movement echoed in the warehouse. Footsteps, soft but deliberate, came from the far end. The boss's hand brushed the ring, a silent signal to prepare. They were not alone. "Stay close," he whispered, moving toward the sound with controlled steps. She followed, heart racing, feeling a strange mix of fear and trust. From the shadows emerged a man, tall and imposing, his face partially hidden by a hood. He paused when he saw the boss, and a tense silence fell. "You should not have come here," the man said, his voice cold and measured. "Your father's debts are not yours to repay, and yet here you are." The boss's eyes narrowed, and he stepped forward, placing himself between the man and the waitress. "She is not your target," he said firmly. "This ends tonight. Leave or face the consequences." The man laughed, a low, dangerous sound. "Consequences? You speak as if you are not already trapped by the past. The ring binds you, and it binds her. You cannot escape what has been set in motion." The waitress stepped closer, her hand brushing the boss's arm. "What do you mean? What does the ring do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension. "It is a symbol," he explained quietly, "of promises, of debts, of loyalty. Your father carried it to protect, but also to warn. Now it has returned, and with it, those who wish to settle old scores." The man in the shadows moved closer, and the boss's posture became sharp, ready for anything. "We can do this quietly," he said, "or it can end in a storm. Choose your path." Before the man could respond, a sudden noise echoed from the far side of the warehouse, a door slamming, a sound amplified by the empty space. Both men turned, tense. The waitress felt her heart hammer in her chest, her hand still lightly touching the boss. She felt the strength radiating from him, the silent promise that he would protect her. The man in the hood stepped back, his eyes narrowing. "This is not over," he said, and then vanished into the shadows, leaving only the echo of his warning behind. The boss let out a slow breath, running a hand over the ring. "He will return," he said quietly, "and next time he will not give warnings." The waitress looked at him, seeing the weight of responsibility in his eyes. "Then we need to be ready," she said firmly. "I want to understand everything. I want to help." He studied her for a long moment, the corner of his mouth lifting in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You are braver than I expected," he said. "But this world, it will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine." They spent hours in the warehouse, uncovering papers, letters, and maps. Each piece revealed more about her father's choices, the enemies he had made, and the alliances he had formed. The boss guided her through each discovery, explaining the meaning behind symbols and the implications of past actions. She listened intently, absorbing every word, realizing how much courage, cunning, and sacrifice her father had required to survive. As night fell again, they emerged from the warehouse, the streets quiet and glistening with residual rain. The city had a deceptive calm, a fragile peace that could shatter in an instant. The boss led her to a quiet rooftop overlooking the streets below. From this height the city seemed almost beautiful, the lights reflecting like jewels in the wet darkness. "You see this city?" he asked, his voice low and reflective. "Every corner has a story, every shadow a secret. Your father knew this. And now you do too." She looked out at the streets, understanding dawning in her eyes. "I never knew," she said softly. "I never knew how dangerous, how connected everything was." He turned to her, his expression softened by a rare vulnerability. "Most people never see it," he said. "Most people live in ignorance and comfort. But you have the choice to face it, to survive it, to understand it." For a moment, silence passed between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city and the occasional drip of water from the rooftop edge. She felt the tension between them, a pull that was difficult to define, part fear, part trust, part something she could not yet name. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught her eye from the streets below. Figures in black coats, moving with quiet precision, shadows among shadows. The boss's gaze sharpened, the familiar coiled readiness returning to his stance. "They've found us," he said quietly, "and they will not wait." Her heart raced, but she did not step back. Instead, she felt a strange resolve. She had come this far, uncovered so much, and now she understood that running was not an option. The danger, the mystery, the bond between them, it was all part of a story she could not escape. The boss turned to her, his voice firm but steady. "Hold close, trust your instincts, and stay behind me. Whatever happens, we face it together." She nodded, and together they moved toward the edge of the rooftop, ready to descend into the city below. Each step was deliberate, each heartbeat a reminder of the stakes. The night stretched before them, full of danger, secrets, and choices that would shape both their futures. And somewhere in the shadowed streets, the enemies waited, patient and silent, ready to strike. Cliffhanger. The ring on his finger seemed to grow heavier, and he whispered almost to himself, "The reckoning has begun." The city was quiet, almost unnaturally so, as the Mafia boss and the waitress moved through the alleys. The wet streets reflected the faint glow of neon signs, but there was no warmth in the light, only the sharp edges of shadows, waiting for mistakes. Every step they took was measured, cautious, aware that danger was close. The events of the past days had brought them closer, a fragile bond forged in fear, trust, and shared secrets. The waitress had learned to read him, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned every shadow, the weight of the past pressing on him. And he, in turn, had begun to see her as more than a witness to his life. She was intelligent, brave, and resourceful. She carried her father's legacy, but she was also her own person, capable of standing beside him, not behind him. They paused at the entrance of an abandoned factory at the edge of the city, the building looming like a silent sentinel. Broken windows stared down like empty eyes, and the wind whistled through gaps in the walls, carrying with it the faint scent of rust and decay. This was the place where the final reckoning would occur, a confrontation that had been building since the day the waitress had first seen the ring. "We must be careful," the boss whispered, brushing the silver ring on his finger. "They are waiting. And this time they will not warn us." She nodded, her own fingers brushing against her father's letter tucked safely in her coat. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever comes, we face it together." He gave her a faint nod, and they moved inside. The darkness of the factory swallowed them, the faint sound of dripping water echoing across the high ceiling. Shadows shifted, as though alive, and both of them felt the weight of anticipation pressing down. Suddenly, figures emerged from the darkness, 5 men dressed in black, faces obscured, movements deliberate. They had waited patiently, knowing the ring would lead them here. Their leader stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "So, the boss comes at last," he said. "And he brings the girl." The Mafia boss's eyes narrowed. He recognized the leader immediately, a man who had once been a trusted ally of her father, now turned enemy. "You should have stayed in the shadows," he said, his voice calm but sharp. "This ends tonight." The waitress stepped forward slightly, her heart pounding but her gaze steady. She had learned to trust the boss and, in turn, trust herself. She was no longer the girl who had served coffee behind the counter. She was a part of this world now, tied to the past and ready to face the consequences. The leader smirked. "Do you think you can protect her?" he asked, his tone mocking. "Do you think the ring will save you?" The boss did not answer immediately. He simply moved forward, positioning himself between the waitress and the men. Every movement was precise, deliberate. He was ready, but he also knew that this fight was not just about strength. It was about cunning, strategy, and understanding the past. Suddenly, the men lunged and chaos erupted. Shadows clashed, fists met bodies, and the sound of struggle filled the factory. The boss moved with lethal efficiency, his experience and skill evident in every step. Yet he did not strike recklessly. Every move was calculated, meant to protect, meant to end the threat without unnecessary harm. The waitress stayed close, observing, learning. She had no weapons, but she had awareness and courage. She guided the boss with whispers, pointing out hidden corners and exits, anticipating the moves of the attackers. In this shared effort, a silent trust had formed, a bond forged in fire and danger. One attacker broke through their defensive line, moving toward her with sudden speed. The boss reacted instantly, stepping in front, blocking the man's path, and using precise movements to subdue him. The waitress watched, awe mingled with fear, realizing the depth of his skill and the lengths he would go to protect her. The fight continued, the air thick with tension and movement. Every shadow seemed alive, every corner a potential threat. And then, in a moment of quiet clarity amid the chaos, the boss glanced at her, eyes meeting hers. There was no fear, no hesitation, only trust, and she returned it, her resolve as strong as his. Finally, the last attacker fell, incapacitated but alive. The factory was silent again, the echoes of struggle fading into the stillness. The boss stood, breathing steadily, and the waitress approached him, her hands slightly trembling. "Is it over?" she asked softly. "For now," he replied, brushing dust from his coat. But this was only part of it. The past is never truly gone, and the ring, it has more to tell us. They moved to a small office at the back of the factory, a room filled with old papers and forgotten items. The boss opened a drawer and pulled out a small chest, the same type she had seen her father's letters in. Inside were more documents, photographs, and a few personal items. Each piece revealed more about the intricate web her father had been part of, a network of alliances, debts, and loyalty bound by honor and secrecy. The waitress studied them carefully, piecing together her father's life and the choices he had made. She realized the magnitude of what had been left for her, the responsibilities, the dangers, and the connections she had inherited. But she also understood that she had a choice, to be consumed by fear or to embrace the truth and use it to protect herself and those she cared about. The boss watched her, seeing the determination in her eyes. He saw a reflection of her father, yes, but also someone entirely her own, capable, brave, and intelligent. "You have grown stronger," he said quietly, "braver than I imagined. And yet, this is only the beginning. The ring is more than a symbol, it is a promise. A promise that the past and the future are bound together, and now you are part of that promise." She looked at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Then we face it," she said firmly, "together." For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy but comforting. The storm outside had passed, and the city below seemed almost peaceful, though both of them knew that peace was fragile, temporary. The ring gleamed in the dim light, a reminder of the past, the danger, and the bond between them. The boss extended his hand, and she took it without hesitation. It was a simple gesture, yet filled with meaning, a connection forged in fire and shadows, a silent agreement to face the challenges ahead together. Then a faint noise caught their attention, a movement from the alley outside. They froze, senses alert, ready for anything. But what emerged was not an enemy. It was a messenger carrying a small envelope. The boss took it, eyes narrowing as he read the contents. "It is from her father," he said quietly. "A message he left for you, knowing that one day you would need it. It speaks of forgiveness, courage, and the choice to break the cycle of fear and violence. He trusted you to make the right decision." The waitress opened the envelope, hands trembling. Inside was a letter, written in her father's careful handwriting. It spoke of his regrets, his hopes for her future, and his belief in her strength. It was a gift, a guide, and a final act of love and trust. Tears welled in her eyes as she read, and the boss watched quietly, understanding the depth of her emotions. For the first time, she felt a release, the weight of the past, the fear of the unknown, and the burden of the ring. She felt a strange peace, a connection to her father, and a clarity she had never known. She looked at him, her voice steady. "We can do this, we can survive, and we can honor the past without being trapped by it." He nodded, a rare softness in his eyes. "Yes," he said, "we can." Together, the night stretched before them, filled with quiet hope and a sense of completion. The city below, once filled with shadows and danger, now seemed like a place where possibilities could exist. The ring on his finger glinted in the light, a symbol of survival, trust, and the bond they had forged. They stepped out onto the rooftop again, overlooking the city. The wind was gentle, carrying the faint scent of rain and fresh beginnings. The Mafia boss turned to her, eyes dark but warm. "The past will always be with us," he said, "but now it does not control us. We have the choice and we have each other." She smiled, feeling the truth of his words. "Then let us make that choice," she said softly. For the first time in years, the boss felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The shadows of the past had not disappeared entirely, but they no longer held power over him. And beside him, the waitress stood strong, a reminder of hope, courage, and the promise of a future that they could face together. The city sparkled below them, lights reflecting in puddles and windows, 1,000 small points of life moving forward. And for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life not ruled by fear, not dictated by the past, but shared with someone who had earned his trust, and perhaps his heart. The ring on his finger gleamed in the moonlight, a symbol of everything that had been lost and everything that could now be found. And together they looked out over the city, ready to face whatever came next, side by side, unafraid and bound by a promise stronger than any shadow.